Hello, check.
Just one off from there.
Check or cash. Hello, check or cash. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you taking time in this cold, wintry evening. The first snow coming out tomorrow. So thank you very much. To get the event started, before we introduce the speakers and the moderator, we'll have a short video about Marlabs. Are we ready? Mike? Thank you very much. So just before we start the event or I introduce the speakers, I just want to tell you a small story which actually gives you a context of this event. Now this happened like 2 to 3 weeks back. It was a Sunday evening. I was at home with my wife and my 2 girls. I have a 16-year-old and a 10-year-old. And my elder one wanted to have shoes for winter. I said, yeah, you can get any shoes. And she said, no, she wants UGG shoes. I'm like, it still beats me why that costs like $100 or more. I don't know. The CMO there has done a great job. Let me tell you that. So she wants UGG shoes. So I never knew about UGG shoes. I like UGG. And then we were going about this. I said, why do you need those shoes? UGG shoes, UGG shoes. It was going on and on and on. And then I said, okay, we'll think about it. And then next day I go into Amazon to order something, and comes a pop-up of UGG. I said, okay, maybe coincidence, right? Go to Facebook, shows me an ad of UGG shoes. My wife goes into her social media, says UGG. I'm like, what is happening? And then I tell my wife, and it may be true, and it is true, that we have echo in the kitchen, and that's where most of the discussions happen, because as any of your homes go, that's where things happen, right? So we have an echo in the kitchen, and we have an echo in the living room. There's no other way the social media would have got the name UGG other than hearing us talk. And I started to do some research, and it might be true. Yeah. So this discussion is not about UGG shoes or what Echo does to your life. but this is about omni-channel experience. And having said that, I would like to introduce the wonderful people here on the podium. What I'm going to do is I'm not going to say too much about them, because if I start talking about each one of them, it will take the whole night, and then we got to head to the bar again. But I'll leave Alan, Chris, Julie, and Tracy to talk about themselves for a brief. But we have Alan Hart, who's going to be the moderator for the event. We have Chris from Marlabs, who helps the customer experience, and we have Julie and Tracy, who's going to be helping us understand what marketing and technology is all about. Alan, over to you.
Well, thanks. Let's introduce ourselves. So I'm Alan. I do a podcast, which I hope later today there'll be much more, at least 40, 50 more downloads. Called Marketing Today with Alan Hart. Last week I had Seth Godin on talking about his new book, This is Marketing, which I had a lot of fun interviewing him. When I'm not doing podcasts or panels, I'm a consultant by day. So you can ask me more about that later. And there's a colleague of mine somewhere in the audience from a partner agency. So I kind of cross over consulting, B2C, B2B, as well as helping agencies as well.
Yeah, and here's Chris Clegg. I'm focused on customer experience at Marlabs. Today I'm talking from a technology perspective. You'll be hearing from the experts to my right more about the business and marketing approach. And really I work with a lot of tools that focus on analytics and AI, helping improve customer experience both inbound as people come into retail stores or call centers, also outbound in terms of web experience and mobile.
I'm Julie Lyle. I'm a career chief marketing officer, chief merchant, and I've worked for brands from Raytheon to Prudential to Walmart to Barnes & Noble here in New York. Currently, I'm doing mostly investing and board work.
Hi, I'm Tracy Wehringer. I have my own consulting firm as well, and been almost like Julie, a career CMO. I have worked with brands such as Prudential, Premier Global, eDiets, Bistro MD, Gold's Gym, a complete mixture between B2B and B2C, and I'm really looking at more of a H2H, human to human, where the lines are blurred. So I look forward to tonight.
Well, Anand illustrated what's happening right now, right, with ads following us everywhere we go. How many folks in the room are a B2B organization? Good. A B2C? So we're like split about half and half. How many marketers are in the room, or you would classify yourselves as marketers? Okay. How about IT? Again, about split, maybe a little less IT folks in the room. We'll be nice to you, I promise. Any other operations? Any other organization functions that I missed? Operations? Yeah, okay. Just wanted, it helps us give a pulse of who's in the room. So Anand talked about what's current. For those that are in the room, I want to kind of take us back. I don't know if any of you remember this time, but there was a time before big box retail, and especially Walmart, I think being the most famous one.
Ouch!
Yeah. Where there were mom and pop stores, right? And you go in and they know your name, they would know your preferences. Sometimes that's still the case at Starbucks. But at that point in time, we as consumers had a lot more power. And if somebody treated us badly, we could take it out of them at church or at the next social function. And over time, those scumbags didn't get any business, right? And then big box stores came around, no offense, Julie, or anyone else in the room. And consumers became more anonymized, right? The organizations were across geographies. They didn't necessarily, corporate officers didn't live in our neighborhoods. And consumers kind of lost some of that power. And I think what's happening today is that we're seeing that pendulum completely shift back, right? Social media has made that apparent and accessible to tweet what you hate and what you love, for better or for worse, not speaking about politics. You know, it's shifted, and you know, you're starting to see some pushback even about the data that we're collecting on individuals, and so I think we're at this really interesting, complex time right now with so much going on, and so many different data sources for us to use, but also how are we the best stewards of that? And then expectations are through the roof in terms of what the experiences that our customers want from us. Because the experiences that are defining their expectations are not confined to the categories that we're in, right? It's whatever experience across categories is defined the best possible experience. That's my new bar. It's no longer my competitors. And so it's created a whole new shift, I think, for marketers in particular and the IT organizations to try to help keep up. So with that as kind of context for this conversation, Julie, I think I'll start with you. You know, Miss Big Box. How would you define the current state of kind of omni-channel customer experience?
It's very difficult to define it. Of course, I think everybody would agree, and because it varies so greatly across geographies, verticals, etc. The best analogy that I find for describing where we are in the process of omnichannel and how it's evolving is I liken it to a 7-year-old child. It's about at that stage where she's beginning to realize what she's physically capable of and not, and what she might grow into. She's just beginning to ask herself those questions. And she's also beginning to realize that there are expectations of her and from her immediate family, and a role that she has to play in that immediate family. But she also has a bigger role in her school environment and in public spaces. She has to behave a certain way in public spaces. And when she's entrusted with things, she has to take care of them in a way that she hasn't in the past. She does have to clean up her room at this point. She has responsibilities. For the first time, she actually has to earn her allowance. And she probably now has to articulate how she earned her allowance, right? And for the first time, she's beginning to really think, albeit in a confused state. She's beginning to think about her future and beginning to aspire, sometimes in a very grandiose way, an unrealistic way, to be the master of the universe. But maybe that's possible, right? And so she's beginning to hopefully make the right choices and at least try to be responsible and at least be thoughtful and very considerate and judicious about the choices that she makes. But we know that she'll only make those choices judiciously if she's in the hands of good grandparents, which are you folks.
Anything you guys want to add?
Sure. Well, from my perspective, I agree with Julie where we are, how it's viewed. But from a marketing tech perspective, I feel that we are in such a great place. We sit in the middle of amazing amount of data, our technology systems, our thought leadership, and really pulling that together. Omnichannel user experience, there's not a finite place where you're going to end up. It's always growing, it's a journey, because as tomorrow another channel will come up, and how does that play in that journey and that interaction of that prospect or customer experience? So, from my perspective, it's constantly growing, developing, and through the use of testing, A/B testing, and understanding how that channel helps us get our message, our brand, into that whole journey of that experience, and what does it do to not only drive conversion or drive loyalty or drive referrals, but it's a constant moving process. So that's kind of how I look at it.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about technology in particular, because if you look at the explosion of MarTech, right? If you go back, I think 6, 7 years, 150 roughly suppliers.
Exactly.
Now there's like 7,000
It's
different
incredible.
players. How do you think about it, making sense of all of that technology? What, as you think about it from a CMO's perspective, what are the kind of top of mind, or how do you think about it? How do you make sense of it?
I'll give a use case. So 2013, late part of 2013, I was consulting for a nationwide insurance company that had 9 separate different business units. The CEO had a problem. No net new revenue. Didn't know what marketing was providing or not providing to the overall business. So he asked me to come in, do a quick kind of 1-month root cause analysis. What is going wrong? Why? He has 14 people on his staff, and there's nothing, no new customers. Should he fire everybody and outsource it? Sorry, I'll hold it. So I came in, looked at the resources, the skills from a top grading perspective. Really looked at the skill set that was part of the team, and then looked at the technology aspects. So the company had Salesforce. It wasn't rolled out to best practices. It was integrated into Marketo, and that itself, a lot of the functionality wasn't turned on early on. And then they had a dialer system, 5.9. So within these 9 business units, some were B2C, some were B2B, and each business unit had its own P&L, own business model. Some had inside sales, some had outside sales. So kind of went through that process, looked at all the content, what was being delivered, what was that sales journey. Once they figured out what a marketing qualified lead kind of looked like, when it went through the sales qualified lead, well, and then look at all the closed loss, all the ones in the past 2 years that were closed loss. Why were they closed loss? It's so easy to just look at the data and say, oh, sales quickly said, hey, closed loss due to price. But really, you do a kind of post-mortem, do a little more due diligence on those closed loss to really realize with a round table of all those people that touch that journey, and learn from that and put processes in place to mitigate some of those closed loss for the next year. So really looked at everything from content, from social media, from all the different channels that they use. And what I provided back to the CEO was a short-term plan and then some long-term goals that mirror kind of the Rockefeller habits. And so long story short, he put me back in charge. He goes, okay, here's your plan, go and do it. So getting this team, firing some, cross-training some, bringing on some fresh people, and getting this team of 8 players that provided strategic content, putting together this complete matrix on what does it look like from a journey from net new content into our brand on any kind of channel, and what does that process look like to get to a marketing qualified lead due to automation, built in a lot of automation, handed that over to sales and sales qualified lead, and have that go through a fast velocity. What can we do speed to close? And from 2014 versus 2013, we ended up growing net new revenue by almost 78%, and it was verified by our controller and everything else. And just the marketing technology of it is making sure the holy grail of marketing is having the right message at the right time in front of the right audience to close that. So, with all these different channels that are out there, it's all about testing and making sure you're getting front and you're engaging in that prospect, knowing their personas, doing some persona studies, and looking at the data, making sure that you're capitalizing on reaching those people within their channels. Because it's not just one and done, it's, somebody might reach out to you through Twitter, others might be through Snapchat on an ad or a filter or whatever. So it's really capitalizing on those channels.
There's so much there. I think that as I listened to you talk about it, you made some strategic bets, right?
Mhm.
Picking Salesforce as one option, right? And then Marketo and making that integration and filling it in, but not losing sight of right message, right place, right time. All of those channels and all of those technologies create a lot of data. And, Julie, I don't know if you want to talk about what's the role of data in customer experience and omnichannel customer experience, and how do we not become creeps?
Also, I think there's probably two questions there. The greatest analogy that I've heard used in the past is, are you using data like a drunk uses a lamppost? If you think of your data as a lamppost, are you using it like a drunk and you're leaning up against it, it's holding you up and bolstering your argument for whatever it is you want to do anyway? Or is it truly guiding you forward and helping light and illuminate the decision-making process, not the decision that you've already made, right? The bias that you already have. And I think that's very, very important. And I see I myself and my marketing colleagues get hung up on that sometimes because we have a bias, right? To be good at what we do, we have to be opinionated, we have to be passionate about our customers, we have to believe that we know them, and if we believe that we know them, we're naturally disposed to have bias. So it's a constant battle to try to fight for objectivity on the one hand. I guess the challenge is for us to balance having, I said, we talked about this a little bit earlier, Tracy, having the data itself, but not losing sight of common sense in the way that you approach the customers and the market itself. The data might take you down a certain path of what your customers want, or what your customers expect, or what your customers would like you to do to differentiate yourself, and certainly that's where you should go, if you can deliver it consistently, authentically, and it is true part and parcel of your brand. You can't blindly follow the data. You have to bring your marketing sense of who you are as a brand and what your offer is. And if they want a certain product category and you can't deliver inventory because you got a problem for whatever reason in your supply chain, then it doesn't matter what the data tells you. You will burn a relationship by trying to be something that you are not. And I see marketers get into that trap as well, where you so much want to satisfy that need. We all do, right? We want to be where they want us to be, but we just can't. Or we just try to be all things to all people. I'll use an example. If I may, I'll stray off a little bit. Some of you know that I recently did an intern stint with Barnes & Noble. And there was one of the challenges with Barnes & Noble, not that there's only one, right? But Barnes & Noble at some point in their history decided to take on big box, to become big box as opposed to continue to compete with independent booksellers, okay? And when they decided to go big, they decided to go home. And the challenge is that when they decided to go big, they decided to get into the mass commoditization business that was owned by Amazon. And at that point, they should have realized, they had enough experience in the business to understand that there was not enough margin in selling books, which, by the way, Mr. Bezos had figured that out early on when you all know, I mean, he'll sell enough in a Prime weekend, he'll sell more in a Prime weekend than Barnes & Noble will sell this year, okay? He figured out that you've got to sell more than books if you're going to make money. And if you think about it, books are probably the worst possible item to ship, right? Just by sheer cube, expense-wise, there's no money in it, right? So the challenge is when they chose to go mass, they didn't realize they didn't have the product and they didn't have the real estate configuration to support a nimble organization. And as such, They couldn't revert back to being the corner bookstore competitor. Because by then they have the mass infrastructure, they have to have hourly employees, not the booksellers that really are making $15, $20, $30 an hour because they genuinely know books, etc. They had to abandon the expensive infrastructure that you can only do on a very micro level because they had to support the big infrastructure, right? There was an article, and then I'll go back to it, Alan. There was an article, interestingly, I want to say it was written 2 years ago. It was an interview with Jeff Bezos. And he said, this goes back to the future, right? It was written about 2 years ago, and it was the New York Times interviewed Jeff Bezos, and they asked him, what was the watershed moment in Amazon's history? And Jeff said, in 2007, one of his investors called him and said, Barnes & Noble has just announced that they're opening e-commerce. You're done. The 900-store chain, the 300-pound gorilla is opening e-commerce, get the lights, you're out. And he said for 2 weeks, investors, friends, family, employees, everybody he knew, neighbors, said, it's over, right? And he didn't know what to do. He finally called, at that point he had 135 employees. He called them all together in a gutted out retail strip center and said, don't focus on the competition, focus on the customer. And that he could deliver that speech on Fifth Avenue here at the Barnes & Noble store, and it would be as compelling today as it was in 2007 under the guise of the orange smirk, right? And I think that's where we as marketers, we want to use data, we want to use technology, and we have to, or we won't survive. And we should, because it's the right thing to do for customers and experience. The same token, we've got to make common sense, common practice, and we've got to bring our hearts back into the equation of the brands and the experience. It has to be a marriage of the two if we're going to succeed.
Well, Chris, I want to bring you into the conversation. So I know the ladies have had a lot of airtime. No, but so we're talking about technology and we're talking about data and the experience, and you come from the technology side.
Yes.
So I was curious if you could share, maybe we were talking at lunch about a case around how one of your customers has used analytics to actually help them, and in an unconventional way. I don't want to spoil it.
All right, and so we have a financial services company we're working with that was going to market in developing markets, so it's outside of the U.S. And it's a market that traditionally, right, has always been kind of the way the U.S. used to be. It was kind of a male-dominated market. The men would go out and earn the money, and the women would be at home raising the kids. And just as happened elsewhere, that's been transformed, right? Women are getting out into the marketplace, working on their own, earning their own income. And this was changing driving behavior changes that really impacted them in a kind of surprising way. Because this is a financial services company. They're selling loans, right? They're selling mortgages and they're selling personal loans. So you're a financial services company, where do you advertise? Financial services websites. They banner ads on banking sites, or people want to pull their credit report, you go there and you see their ad. And the revenue was okay, they were growing 10% a year, but they thought that there were opportunities that weren't being served in the market. But they didn't really know where those opportunities were. And so what they started to do is use analytics to look at how are people using the loans that they did issue, who purchased them, and how did they use them. And the answer kind of came in a surprising way, is it was primarily middle-class women were the primary purchasers of their product. And what they were using is because they were out in the workforce now earning their own money, and they wanted to return that in a way that resonated with them personally, and that is they wanted to reinvest it in their family, and it was focused on entertainment and holidays and vacation. And a lot of them were taking out these personal loans to bring the family on trips. And this is something that they really hadn't expected this to be the primary purchaser or user of their service. And so they changed their marketing focus, is instead of advertising their financial products on financial services websites, they simply started showing up on travel sites and event sites and tourism sites. So people were looking into, I'm going to go on vacation, I'm going to go to Disney, I'm going to go to China and see the Great Wall. And people will go to those websites and start to see their ads. And within 2 years, they end up having a 70% year-over-year boost in revenue in the second year, because now they understood who their customers were and what they were buying and why they were buying. And so that changed their go-to-market message. And I think the takeaway from us is, and people alluded to this earlier, don't go in with a pre-built assumption around what the data is going to show you, right? They had their minds open about, let's see what the data reveals to us about their customers. Like how the customer base was different than what they expected. And by responding to that data in a meaningful way, they're able to become more effective at marketing. And it was really analytics revealed surprising information. And as much as we have a lot of marketing expertise up here, I also encourage people to kind of open their minds and listen to what the information is telling them. I've seen too many clients go in and we know our products, we're the experts, we know our market, nobody knows it better than we do. But a lot of the analytics information and the AI tools are starting to reveal some surprising out-of-the-box information. So people can think about who their customers are, who their buyers are, how they're really using their products and services, maybe in a different and unexpected way.
One of the things that stood out to me as we were talking about this earlier is this example, through the use of AI, I believe, in this example, self-corrected for biases, right, that we all have about our own businesses, right? And I think it's an interesting thing because a lot of analytical tools have come before. It's incumbent on the person doing the analysis to kind of set the search parameters, right? And this really is a shift in cognitive view, right? Like even how to apply these tools when they can search for solutions that we never even thought were trained of.
The old view was you go to market and if you're building an IT system, you build an expert system. You find if you want to improve sales, you talk to a sales expert. If you want to improve industrial reliability, you talk to an engineer. And people try to build systems around the core of these experts. But there's really a shift now, and the shift is to focus on outcomes. I want to improve sales, I want to improve customer service, I want to reduce customer churn, I want to improve the reliability of my industrial process. And so by focusing on outcomes, you're taking out a lot of the middle, which is where I would try to quantify or program and get computers to act as though they were expert, which turned out to be a very difficult task to do. So there's a lot of talk about AI systems in the market now, but AI doesn't work the way a lot of people think. And people think, well, you've taught the computer how to think, and the computer is now the expert. That's not what AI systems do. But rather what they're doing, especially in relation to marketing and analytics, is that AI systems are looking for correlations and connections. And because the systems don't have bias, sometimes they're able to find connections that are surprising to people. We don't think they exist. We had a client who was drilling for oil offshore, and they had 144 machine tool sensors. When they send these drill bits down, they're looking at the current, the temperature, the salinity of the water, how deep the water is, and they're gathering all sorts of information. And they used to take their engineers, and the engineers would forecast their maintenance. When an oil rig goes offline, it costs $250,000 a day downtime. So the ROI here is tremendous. And what they found is by applying predictive analytics, the AI systems are able to find correlations between things that the engineers hadn't realized that were there. And there are two outcomes that happened. One is the scheduled maintenance, the predicted downtime, they're actually able to reduce it because the AI said you're doing it too frequently. The reason they were doing it too frequently is they were trying to avoid expensive unplanned downtime. And the AI also improved that because it was able to predict when things were going to break. And it found that there were correlations between the information that the engineers weren't aware of. And so by finding those correlations, they actually improved the reliability of the system, reduced the downtime for maintenance, and their payback was in hundreds of millions of dollars. It was a significant payback for a relatively small investment.
I will tell you, this is truly a non-commercial plug, but I've only known Chris 6 hours. And he speaks more intelligently about AI than most. And I'm an investor in AI companies, and he speaks more intelligently about how to truly put it to work in a business environment than most people I've met. Seriously. I will tell you, we used AI when I went to Prudential. And by the way, Tracy worked for the Blue Rock
Yes.
here in Jersey. I worked for the Pru, the little Indian out of the UK. And I was based out in Asia, mostly developed markets. I got there in 2008 at the height of the global financial crisis. And when I started, we were in 11 markets out there, and insurance, typical insurance, was 85% of the total sales in the region. And I was told we've been out in that region about 15 years at that point, maybe a little more. I was told that the people that buy our insurance policies are 45 to 46-year-old men across our region, largely within that range group, and they were the ones executing the policies, and that was our key target. At the time, we were 23% of the global sales for Prudential. And we leveraged artificial intelligence and the data to see past the facts of who executed those policies and had for many years, to look for the patterns of behavior. And in fact, the facts told us that those were the people in the head of household that were signing those agreements and making those financial commitments. But the patterns of what we knew about those families was that, in fact, when the oldest child hit 12 years of age, that is when the wife began the panic of, I gotta buy cars, I gotta buy college funds, what if something happens to the primary breadwinner? And she began the nag. And the nag drove the head of household to sign the insurance policy, because culturally it wasn't acceptable for the wife to make the financial commitment. We shifted 40% of our above-the-line marketing to creating 10, 30-second animated children's music videos. Because in those regions, we did qualitative studies to validate all of this stuff. We found that, first of all, kids think that ATMs are printers. Children don't believe somebody puts money in the box. They think someone somewhere types it in and it prints the money right there. You might go back, if any of you have young kids, you might check that out at home. At least over there, that's what they believed. And there were many misnomers about the concept of earning money and having it available to you, saving it. So we made these children's videos, music videos, and of course we embedded some Prudential branding inside the music video, by accident, of course. And we knew that also that the parents, the mothers, would sit and watch children's television programming with their kids to learn English as a second language. That was a common shared family experience. We ran these intentionally English language videos in non-English speaking countries in children's musical videos and introduced them as curriculum, financial curriculum in school systems. We went from not being listed on the top 2,000 brands in Asia to number 69 in 2 years, where every single one of our competitors who had been in the region at least a decade longer than we had declined in ranking. And we went from 23% of the global revenues to 56% of the global revenues. This is at the height of the global financial crisis. Phenomenal, but we used AI to do it. And we did overlay some qualitatives, but we used AI to find those true nuggets of truth.
Well, I know we want to open it up for questions, so you guys out there in the audience, get ready to ask anybody questions up here. But before we do that, maybe, Julie, what do you foresee the future? If you've got your crystal ball out, what do you see the future of omnichannel customer experience looking like? Are we headed towards the Jetsons, or where are we going?
Wow, that little 7-year-old has no idea what she's going to be. I think, it's interesting. I don't want to take the analogy too far, but everybody looks at a little 7-year-old and thinks, I wonder what she'll be, right? I don't know. I think ultimately we're going to have to be responsible about our data and how we use it. I do believe that we've all seen realistically that financial services and healthcare, and there are other industries, but those two certainly lead the pack in terms of where creepy becomes an issue or how we have to be very, very careful. But by and large, consumers have shown us that they're willing to give you more data, because the true commerce of e-commerce is convenience. It is, right? That's what you're selling online. And there has to be value, it has to be experience and all of that, but it's the experience and convenience and value, it all blurs, right? So where will we be? I think we'll be convenient. I think we'll have to see how, I think convenient will be part and parcel of that experience and that relationship with the brand, and it will either be accretive to loyalty, because that's relationship and loyalty are one and the same. And the technology, I hope we get to a place where the technology is certainly in full force, like you were describing, Tracy, but it's invisible to the customer, it's seamless. Because right now, we're the only ones that use the word omnichannel. We're the only ones that use e-commerce. Customers don't say that.
They say buy.
You never hear a customer like, oh yeah, I bought it. They might say I bought it online, but that's no different than if I bought it at the mall. They don't think of it as e-commerce. They just don't. They bought it at this mall versus that mall. That's the way they think of it, and they expect the experiences or the value delivery system to be the same. I think we've got to get to where what we provide matches their expectation, at least. And some of us in this room are going to do some stuff that's really, really cool. I'm looking forward to seeing that.
And one thing I just want to interject as well is one item that we really didn't mention, but was listening to the voice of the customer in this journey. Being able to see where they're supplying any positive feedback, any negative feedback, and being able to be agile enough and responsive enough to provide from your brand integration into the voice of your customer. Making sure, is it a chat bot that answers, live chat, and look at that experience and just making sure that you have the resources, whether it's automated through tech or folks, to really make sure that from a brand awareness and a brand equity, that because everybody, the first place somebody goes if it's a negative feeling with that brand is they'll go to Twitter, they'll go to their friends and everything else, but just making sure that you have a closed loop view on the voice of the customer. So that's just one aspect of the whole omni-channel, customer experience.
Absolutely, I think that's a great point, and it underlined that the customer understanding is, at the end of the day, it's empathy for what they want and how they want.
And trust of brand.
Good point.
Yeah, Zig Ziglar once said, I love this quote from Zig Ziglar, is people will listen to you if they like you as a brand, but if they trust you, they will do business with you. So it's automatic. It's that view of trust of brand that really comes through, and trust of person. So.
Are there questions out there? Anybody got a question? There's one back there.
One of the things that I struggle with and would love some tips on is making senior leadership understand the resource constraints, because whenever you talk about omnichannel, everyone wants to talk high-level strategy, vision, and it's all this pie in the sky, and we're stretched super thin. So how do you kind of set those expectations and, make them, appreciate the crawl, walk, run approach?
I say facts and figures. Facts and figures sell everything. From my perspective, is going to the CEO and saying, okay, here we are today. This additional process, or wherever your goal is, if your goal is to, retain clients, is it growing net new revenue? And coming up with what is that cost going to be, and what will my potential ROI going to be. So if you could bring in those facts and figures, work with your CFO organization to get that data, that will definitely help tell the story. And I know from a board perspective, that's the stuff that really matters. So.
Are you a business to consumer or business to business?
Is B2C, senior living.
So I don't want to paint a broad brush, but I think what Tracy's saying is spot on. I will say that with many of the companies, some of the companies that I've worked with, opportunity cost is not their long suit. right? So they just like they have a hard time understanding this legacy system. Call it sunk cost, walk away and invest in new. They're reticent to do that. A lot of companies are, but in B2C businesses, I find that to be prevalent. The same is true in investments, even if the legacy challenge is not necessarily hardware, it might be human resources, et cetera. If you don't have the data, I mean, if you have the data, Tracy's answer is exactly right. If you don't have the data, do some hypotheticals and say to them, if every new customer is worth X number of dollars to us in the first year alone and lifetime value X, whatever you know, right? Then not acquiring those customers is costing us X at our current margin run rate, okay? And if we don't acquire them over the next 3-year term, that's costing us Y. And if our current customer base is referring new customers at a percentage of X, then it's also costing us an additional new customers at Y, and run that scale for them and say, how much of this do we want to continue to do? Or if the lack of this technology is driving so many thousand calls to our call center on a weekly basis, let's assume that that represents 75% of the problem, which we know is a joke. These are just the people that are irritated enough to stop their day to call us. Okay, but let's just say it's 75% of them. Of the 75, we're not solving 50% of the problem. So if we lose 50, what is that attrition rate? And do some extrapolation, even if you have to guess. In their minds, they'll quickly have that calculator running as to what that means. And say, not only will we pay back this investment in so many months or whatever, but the overall customer experience and brand impact is significant. Let the brand impact and the overall experience be the end of the story. The dollars be the front end of the discussion.
So when we speak of e-commerce and we think of omnichannel, we think of so many companies who have tried to really go omnichannel e-commerce. You had someone like Wehringer Flowers create a chatbot. I think some other fashion company also had like a chatbot for e-commerce. And then you have deals coming in through Alexa. But I read a stat somewhere that it's still not effective. Like only about 5 to 10% of daily active users on Alexa use it for shopping. And the pickup is even less when you think of chatbots. So chatbots have been around now for, I would say, like mainstream for at least 2 years. Alexa for much longer, even though the voice shopping is fairly new. What do you think, and this is again a question to all of you, what do you think is the main challenge or the main reason why they haven't become, I wouldn't say mainstream, but at least like somewhat mainstream? What is shopping? Is it technology not there, or is it more that the customers are not ready for it? Because this is a question which I get asked a lot, because I'm a proponent of emerging technologies, and every time I bring that up and decode the facts and figures, like, but you don't have the figures when it comes to the conversions. So how do I convince my clients that, no, you wait for it, don't go into the plateau of negativity as yet, just as yet. So I'm interested in knowing what you think about it.
I'll add one thought and then you guys chime in, but I mean, I think after I've probably interviewed, I think now I'm up to 120 different thought leaders and marketers. And so this is more their insight that I'm regurgitating than my own. But I think whether you're talking to an academic who studies marketing and is an economist by training, or whether you're talking to an ad agency executive talking about the next great campaign, at the core of that is it only works, and economics is a great example. Economics is the study of people and the decisions that they make with their money. And if we think about at the core of it is people, how fast do people change? And that is probably the biggest barrier to any of these additional channels coming online or scaling at the rates that we think, is that it takes a lot for people to change or to accept that as a new routine, right? Or a new behavior from them. And so I think at the core of it is probably a people issue, right?
Adoption, absolutely.
Adoption issue.
Definitely say adoption.
I also think some of it is the nature of what you're buying with that technology, right? So if I'm buying a television, I'm not going to go buy a 4K TV over Alexa. right? Alexa, order me a TV. No, I'm going to want to read and research. So what I'm typically going to buy online through Alexa is commodities. And I don't know, people in here are familiar with the book, The Power of Habit? Anyone that probably read that, Target did a study and they found that people change their buying pattern from commodities at inflection points in their lives. Right, and they go into great detail, and it's also a great poster child for creepy things that can happen in their lives. But they said that people would change commodities only, births, deaths, marriage, moving, and otherwise, if you want to buy that roll of paper towels, it takes a lot because you're buying out of habit. So unless there's an inflection point in my life that's going to change that buying pattern, I'm just going to keep buying it the same way I always do. And that means that maybe I've got this cool device in my family room that can order paper towels, but I've been going to the supermarket and buying them for 20 years. There's no incentive for me to change that, unless there's some other outside inflection point that influences that. So I suspect that's probably behind a lot of voice search, but voice search is increasing. Purchases are up about 60% over the last 2 years for voice search. So even though it's still a small percentage of the total, that adoption is starting to happen. And I think you'll see it continue to grow.
Well, I don't want to pick on Barnes & Noble, but to your point, if you're not experimenting now, and that inflection point happens, and you're behind, it's game over. And so I think there's a need to continue to experiment, otherwise.
I think that's a massive challenge for marketers, right? Especially with all the technology that's evolving, is how much do you test and learn, and how much do you stay the course? And it's very hard at at executive level, board level too, to make those decisions. I'll let my big box show, and I'm sure Alan will say, tuck it in. But in a big box environment, the response by and large would be the pioneers get the arrows and the settlers will get the land. Okay, and what I would say is, I agree with what Alan's saying. You've got to do some test and learn, and you've got to be ready. I do think there's a balance, that there's a middle ground. You can make decisions that don't preclude your being ready to pounce when the tipping point happens, the consumers do decide to adopt. And there are decisions that you can make about that ready your team or even your thinking in terms of, to your point, to Chris's point, there are items in your offer or services in your offer that are well poised for that kind of delivery or ordering purchasing experience, right? Are you ready? Because you've got supply issues and back of house and fulfillment and other issues as well. Are you ready to pounce on that when it becomes necessary? And do you need to build it yourself? Because by the time that tipping point happens, there's probably a provider out there that's gotten it right, and you don't need a homegrown solution because it probably won't be best in class by then anyway, because it's changing so fast. So make sure your own house is in order, and that your teams are ready to be watching and reading the tea leaves. And when it comes time to pounce, you know who the vendors are that have it stacked up and are ready to go, and you haven't made a decision with an existing platform technology or stack that precludes you from bolting on and moving quickly. That would be
Agreed. Well, I know we're standing between you and food.
Oh.
And I don't want to squelch questions, so we're going to be here, we're going to be eating. Feel free to capture us, but I think it probably is time to go through the buffet.
Yeah, Alan, thank you. So before we get into dinner, just a couple of announcements. One is, what we are planning to do is we are going to have a lucky raffle for Raj. Could you just, so the raffle is like, we're going to pick 3 business cards, and what we're going to do is our marketing team, headed by Chris, is going to work with your team to identify your use case, and we will try and help you to find out a solution how marketing can help in that specific use case. And we're going to do that for you free. So Raj will go around to get some business cards, and we'll have 3 lucky organizations, or I would say we would be lucky thrice to work with your organizations to create that use case. And, yeah, go ahead. So as soon as we do that, we head out for dinner, and if anybody of you would like to speak to Alan, Chris, Julie, or Tracy after dinner, we have the rooftop bar, which is open from, which we have for the next couple of hours. So you could have a one-on-one discussion with any of them. And hopefully, by the end of that 2 or 3 hours there, as Julie rightly mentioned about the drunk at the lamppost, we'll try and see how that, I mean, I've never seen it, but maybe we'll try and figure out how that works. So please go ahead.
So definitely take advantage of this.
Please put in your business cards. Ma'am, pretty much just go around. Do we have everyone? Do we have everyone? This side of Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. So if you don't have any business cards, you can put your name tags in. Yeah.
Nobody's gonna know it's me.
Yeah, for 20. Yeah.
Anybody else? Are we ready? Yeah, everyone's on like that.
It was, I thought it was a Mr. from Boston.
Yeah, so let's bring it out here up front.
Marketing or,
Hey, Raj.
have you guys come to and have this?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so, hello? Yeah, so let's head out for dinner. We'll do the drawing during dinner time. So let's head out for dinner. Thank you very much. Thank you, Alan, Chris, Julie, and Tracy. Thank you very much.